Hey everybody, welcome back. Hope you all enjoyed so far. We've got you up on some good battle scenes that have going on in the Pacific. Let's shift here, and we're gonna bring you up to speed in this pivotal year, 1942. 1942. One that is what we just talked about off camera. One that would be, if you were to look at it in terms of the war, the one that really makes or
It's
breaks.
the year.
Yeah, it's the year.
It's
Yeah.
the year. I mean, some of the events start a little sooner, like Pearl Harbor gets us into the war in December '41.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of like the 100 Years' War.
Yeah.
It's 100 and whatever.
Yes,
So if
right.
you went from December of '41 to, say, February of '43, you would really capture a year of a war that changes the course of the war. Because
Well,
we talked, not last week, but 2 weeks ago,
Mhm.
when we talked about that darkest hour. Things look bad. The Atlantic ships are sinking so fast in the Atlantic we can't replace them.
Sure.
The Soviet army just disintegrated when the Germans pushed in in the Ukraine,
yeah.
heading towards Stalingrad
Right.
and down to the Caucasus.
Right.
They're pushing into Egypt, which just terrifies the British. Everything about British mentality is protect the road to India.
Right.
That is the crown jewel of empire, and Egypt is the short path.
Well, you got
If you have to go all the way around, it just takes forever.
with the Suez Canal there being just
Yes.
east of the main nation of India or of,
Well,
of
yeah,
Egypt.
where the Nile comes, that's where
Correct.
everybody lives.
Right, and the idea that, of course, we can't give the Germans that, because if we
no.
give that to I'm sorry, not really the Germans per se, but it was a coalition of German and Italian forces
Yes.
there in western Egypt. But the main battle we're going to talk about right now is El Alamein.
Right. I mean, we fought over Tobruk both directions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the British would go west and take it, and then they'd go east, and the Italians would take it back.
Sure.
But then Rommel shows up,
Ooh.
and his tactics and his strategies, or I guess operations, for lack of a better term, kind of that middle between tactics and strategy.
Yeah.
He's not in charge of strategy. That's Hitler in Berlin.
Oh yes, the big man.
But he really starts pushing the British back on their heels. Well, the British, the Anzacs, the Greeks. The Anzacs being the Australians and New Zealand Army Corps.
Yes, there you go.
Which is a good name for them. Anzac was, whoever came up with that acronym should definitely get a bonus.
Oh, that was actually World War I that they did that.
Well, they kept it.
They did.
So it worked out well.
It did.
It's one of the things that we'll talk about maybe a little bit later in the war, but Australia has two armies for all intents and purposes.
Mm-hmm.
They have one that goes anywhere and one that stays at home, the territorial army.
For sure.
And they don't draft.
No.
You get a choice where you go. So that's going to play a major role in some of the things that happen towards the end of the war in the Pacific, especially.
For sure, for sure.
Anyway.
So as we see, of course, the main objective here is to protect the Suez.
Cairo / the Suez.
Right.
I mean, if one falls, the other one's going to be almost impossible to maintain.
It's a domino effect,
Yeah,
right? And so as you'll see, it's a little fuzzy to see, but again, the Nazi group, for lack of a better term, coalition group, whatever you'd like to call it.
Yes.
Headed by Erwin Rommel, this desert fox, as he is called. He is the one that really does move.
He understands desert warfare very well. He just understands, well, one, you can't go too far south. This looks like a big long way because it's a big part of the map.
Yeah.
But that's like 50 miles.
Right.
Because the Qatar Depression down here, you just don't go in there. It's just desert on top of bad desert.
Well, and here's the deal. At least if you're close to the sea, if you're close to the shoreline, you have some more traction in
You have
this.
supplies. There are no roads down here. Your logistics are a nightmare down here.
Right.
But you can't let them outflank you.
No.
So this depression becomes kind of like that right flank for the Italians.
Mm-hmm.
But the main battle is going to be up along the coast. If the Germans didn't fight for the air so well, the British probably would have just dragged out their battleships and shelled the heck out of the whole side thing. And the Germans would have been in trouble.
Well, unfortunately,
But they
that's not the
couldn't.
case.
Right.
That's not the case.
The German air power was still it was still a fight in the air.
Oh, for sure.
Later, that goes away, partially because of a place called Malta.
Huh.
Little island, little speck south of Italy,
Yes.
but it stays in British hands.
There you go.
And they have an airfield, and they really make the Germans pay for their supplies
Oh, I bet.
as they try to ship them from Italy down into Libya. When you look at what Rommel was able to do with all the things that were going wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just not even counting his Italian allies as a big bag of sand.
Well, yeah, that's the Italians, though, for you.
Yeah, their army does not perform well in this war at all.
No.
But I mean, this whole battle gets set up. The British are retreating, and the last general, Auchinleck,
Mm-hmm.
is the British commander, and he sets up this defensive line, El Alamein, when the Germans are still farther away,
Right.
because he knows he needs to trade some space for time. Well, there's really nothing out there. El Alamein is basically a train stop.
Well,
It's not like it's, a strategic mineral resource or a population center. It's just, it's a whistle stop.
it's an opportunity for them to at least regroup.
Yes, they have to pull back that far because that way the railroad gets them supplied
Right.
and they can start building these fortifications, getting their artillery set up for a set piece battle against a very mobile opponent.
And the thing is that El Alamein is technically two battles in one.
Yeah,
There's
you're
the
right.
first one where you again see Rommel just sweeping across, and Auchinleck, is that
Yeah.
correct? Auchinleck is just pushback, ready to go, setting up again, like what you
Yeah.
said, those stationary places.
He's got to develop a line
Right.
because this mobile, he doesn't have the armor, and even the armor he has isn't mobile. British tanks tend to be heavily armored
Sure.
and slow.
Yeah. Well.
Which is not working out well
Doesn't-
against these German tanks, which are fast.
Well.
And I say fast, it's a relative term.
Sure. Yeah.
30 to 35 miles an hour is lightning fast for a tank at this time.
Well, you're not looking at Abrams of
No.
the 1990s and 2000s.
Right, you're not looking at what we're used to thinking about.
Right. And so again, by mid-October, roughly.
Then Auchinleck gets canned.
Yeah.
Churchill cans him
No.
because he's lost.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, he's
he
basically
effectively lost.
He's
right.
basically said, "This is the skinniest part of the war
Mm-hmm.
that I can fight Rommel on even approaching something equality that we might have a chance to win." And to Churchill, that's defeatism.
Well, and you also got to realize Auchinleck is doing it strategically because of this depression down here.
Right, he's got this narrow collar that they
Yeah.
go through. If he gets past here, it spreads out.
Sure.
Yes, it's hard to supply down there, but Rommel's not averse to driving tanks and trucks through the desert.
No, he's done it
okay.
before.
He's done that. That was his attack pattern. Go out in the desert, come back in, cut them off, push
Right.
forward, cut
Right.
them off,
Yeah.
push forward. It's kind of like a one-handed version of the Blitzkrieg,
Yeah.
where you do two and you pincer everybody inside,
Right.
and then the infantry comes up and captures them.
Sure.
And you do it like this. Well, he's got the C on one side, so he just does it with one arm.
Well, hey, you got to do with what you got.
One arm tied behind his back.
There you go. Well, in fact, I'm sure it's probably better than most of them who are trying to run through the desert. And
Yeah, they go through quite a few British commanders.
I can imagine.
Auchinleck is probably one of the best that doesn't get any notoriety because he plans the battle, but he gets canned.
but he never actually gets to see it through.
Right, because
Yeah.
Bernard,
Mm-hmm. Yes, Bernard Law Montgomery, who he's going to make a little bit of a name for himself.
well, this is how he gets his name in the papers, that's for sure. I mean, he's already one of the top armor commanders
Sure.
of the British armor, which isn't saying a lot, but it's there.
Well,
And Egypt is the only place that they can fight back.
yeah.
It's kind of like Coral Sea
Right.
for the Americans. The only place the British can have a chance to fight on, even with any chance of success, is Africa. And so they've got to win. They can't afford to lose Cairo.
No.
The nightmare that I would have, because by this point, Churchill already knows the final solution isn't really a done deal yet, but he already knows what they're doing to Jews in Russia, in Germany. He already knows about that. The concept of Nazi flag flying over Jerusalem would just have to be a nightmare.
It's.
It would just be. I don't even know how you would function.
I never really put it into perspective like that.
Because once you take the Suez Canal, you're driving to Jerusalem.
And you're going right into all of that.
Beirut, and Israel, and Syria, and then eventually Iraq, which has a fairly pro-German government.
Of course.
Well, last thing you want to see is, then where do you defend? The Sudan? That's not got much.
No.
Ethiopia? Well, that's trying to get over from being conquered.
Right. So you got a lot. You don't
if
have
we lose
much.
here,
Right.
it's not good.
No. And so let's walk through this. Okay, we've got a lot of coalition forces here. You've got the British, of course.
Right, British, South African, and Australian, New Zealanders.
Right.
And I think some Gurkhas. I mean, you just literally, it's
everybody.
the British Empire.
It's
showed up.
everybody.
It's everybody.
You've got the Greeks, you've got some Free French, and
Yeah.
they are standing their ground.
They found a place where they can stand their ground against the German/Italian forces, who have been pushing them back really steadily for the last 3-4 months.
And so because these Italian and German forces are not well equipped to have this stationary battle, is it more of an effective means of fighting, or?
It's kind of like for a boxer, you know, a heavyweight boxer who's fighting a guy who's fast on his feet. Get him into a corner.
Okay.
Make him fight you as boxing, as
Got it.
opposed to moving.
Right.
This is Auchinleck/Montgomery's chance to make Rommel fight, not outmaneuver, fight.
Right. Okay.
That really is what it comes down to, is I can't beat you in the open with all of this moving around. My tanks aren't fast enough. I don't have enough of them to begin with. You're better at it, period.
Well,
now,
I've got artillery.
But now, you have to come at me at certain spots
yes.
where my artillery can shoot at you.
Like down here into the south.
Well, you see these little hillocks and stuff like that, but especially up there, there's all these little redoubts that the British build that allow them to channel tanks into certain areas, which means
You're
the
sitting
artillery
ducks,
is
literally.
already zeroed on that spot.
So it's like a choking point for many
Yes.
of these tanks that the Germans are like, oh, fine, whatever, we'll do whatever we need to do to fight this battle. But
But they have to fight.
yes.
They have to break through, which is not something they've really been doing. They've been outmaneuvering,
and then gobbling up.
then gobbling up. Well, once you get cut off from supplies, it's very difficult to hold a line.
Sure.
You're not getting any food, you're not getting any water, which would be incredibly important,
But
or
of course,
ammo.
But of course, El Alamein, or
Right.
the train whistle stop there.
Yes, that
is-
becomes the gigantic supply dump.
Right, I was going to say it's behind these British and coalition forces, so that's a positive for them.
Oh, well, that's their supply center, like 12 miles from the front. Basically, far enough away
Far
that
enough from
the
the
artillery.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Germans, their supply center is Tobruk, which is
Oh my gosh!
like 200 miles to the west.
Wow.
Yeah, they have little ones, of course, but
It's nothing like
you're
what.
farther and farther on the far end of your supply chain.
And as you go further and further from your supply chain, the worse it is for you
Right.
to actually resupply and make it.
I need 1,000 gallons of gas for all my tanks, but you only get 600.
Yeah,
Well, okay, I can function, but I can't do as much as I used to.
I can't maneuver like I did before.
And so for Rommel, if he doesn't win at El Alamein, he's going to have to retreat,
And well,
which has been the nature of this war since 1940.
and that's what ultimately happened.
I mean, back and forth, back and
yeah,
forth.
Yeah.
But you know, there's nothing really horribly dramatic. Sidi Barrani is a good battle in the middle of it, but it's really just the Germans and the Italians just don't have the punch to get through these well-prepared, well-defended, well-supplied lines.
Right.
And then, which of course, once Rommel realizes that, it's time to pull back, which I'm sure didn't make Hitler happy.
Well, as you'll see here, just by the sheer numbers, you have over 110,000 German and Italians captured in this
Right.
battle. That's a huge amount.
Well, because it works both ways. Once you've spent your energy trying to get through these lines and failed, the British have been sitting there. They've got full tanks of gas. They
Now
can
it's
come
time to
after you,
vroom.
and you can't. You know, you're running away on foot. They've got a tank. Even if it's a slow tank, it's still faster than you.
Sure thing. But there's not many. Well, there's not many dead. Not like what
No.
you've seen in other battles.
It's-
Not like what you've seen in the Eastern Front up there in Russia.
Again, we have all these little flags, but the number of troops is fairly small. Nothing. I mean, this is
tiddlywinks.
This is a
compared-
tiddlywinks compared when we compare to the next one in Russia.
Sure, sure.
When we start looking at millions of people on each side, we're talking hundreds of thousands total.
Mm-hmm. On both sides. Both
Right,
sides
together,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
So, it's a smaller battle, but it is key because it basically says, nope, you're not going to go any farther east. And if you didn't do it now, again, Britain is in the same place with Germany as we are with the Japanese.
Right.
Their industry been going for longer, but now with the Americans sending more Lend-Lease stuff, the Canadians and everybody else is ever involved, they're building up a stockpile of material.
Which is
Stuff.
Which is definitely helping all groups.
So, if he didn't break through now, it's not likely he's ever going to break through.
well, and
So
that's
now
a good thing.
now he's going to have to make a fighting retreat,
Right.
which he does all the way to Tunis.
Mhm. Well, and unfortunately,
Because
that's
in
where
what, November,
Mhm.
so right after this battle, we land
right.
in the west, in
Right.
Algiers and Morocco, Algeria. I'm sorry,
Sorry,
I don't
yeah,
know
yeah.
if we landed in Algiers itself, but
We
land in
land
Algeria for sure.
just outside of Casablanca.
Yes,
We take
somewhere.
Casablanca, we go into Morocco, we go into Algeria, and then eventually,
Head for Tunisia, so we start
Yes.
squeezing,
yes,
and that squeeze, other than that little hiccup at Kasserine Pass, where we finally have to fight the Germans
yes,
with really
Right.
green troops.
right. Well,
It was fascinating to me because, having been a veteran, I went in the Army, I did, 9 weeks in basic training,
Right.
and then I went to get trained to do my job. Even as an infantryman, that would have been another 8 to 9 weeks.
mhm.
These guys were getting like 6 weeks of basic training to get in on a boat, which is just flabbergasting to me.
Well, and they're
That
not.
these are not well-trained, well-honed fighting machines.
They're not, I mean, honestly, even your basic training lessons that you had in the 80s versus my basic training lessons that I had in the mid 2000s,
Mhm.
2000 teens, nothing compared to what these gentlemen had to deal with or what they learned. I
Right.
mean, I probably learned similar to what you learned, battle tactics, how to land nav, things along those lines.
Yep.
These guys, how do you shoot a rifle? Okay.
Because many of the city folk didn't.
Right.
And again, in the 1930s, our population shifted to
Of course.
predominantly urban as
Right.
opposed to rural.
We finally make that shift over the 50% mark. Right.
So now you're looking at most of your draftees, it probably even a higher percentage because so many of the people in like the Midwest, like around here,
Mhm.
they're the sole breadwinner, or they're the only one that can work the farm. Well, you need food, so you
Sure.
give them a draft. They don't have to.
Yeah, they've got the
what is it? Draft
reprieve.
waiver. There
Yeah,
you go, waiver.
yeah. So you got guys like from Brooklyn, or you got guys from San Francisco, or you got guys from
Chicago,
all
LA.
over the place of your urban centers. Not so much.
Probably the best place I've seen that is in the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah.
It seemed like almost everybody was from a major
You got
city.
A Train coming from
Yeah.
Harlem.
Yeah.
You got people from Chicago.
Chicago,
You got
yeah.
people from Atlanta. You got people from all over the place.
And which is another thing that this war does differently in the United States than any other war,
Yeah,
is our divisions are not geographically based.
it's
It's just,
almost
we're going
it's
to
a
take everybody
conglomeration.
together and
Yeah.
put them out there.
Yeah, you may be a part of the 5th Infantry, but you're not.
When the 82nd was formed in World War I,
Right.
the All-American,
Right.
it was the first division that they tried to do that with. We
I-
go to World War II, they're all that way.
I think that's a better opportunity.
Well, it prevents things. Now, our National Guard units, they got activated and sent. We'll see, like on D-Day, Bedford Falls, Virginia suffers catastrophic losses to their men.
Right.
But it's less than it used to be because we're not fighting with like the 20th Maine.
Yeah, you're not having the 35th ID from the Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska National Guards all coming from
'Cause you
one
only have, what,
geographic area.
4 or 5 National Guard divisions total in the war. So when there's 100 some divisions in the war, you don't notice it as much.
Yeah.
But it really does change, which of course sets the stage for desegregation. But that's
Of
after
course,
the war.
that's something
But I
that
mean,
we
it's,
talk about
it's
later.
a huge cultural change.
Yeah. So let's move forward.
Yes.
We've got El Alamein. It's amazing. It's an awesome turning point for the British here in Egypt, which helps again the pushback.
7 months later, Africa is in Allied hands.
Exactly.
The whole thing.
Yes.
We're done.
Definitely. We're done. We move on to bigger and better things.
Yes.
And we move on to, unfortunately, the bloody boot. But
whatever.
We'll get to that later. The next major battle we are going to focus on today, of course, is Stalingrad.
We talked a little bit too much about it last time, but
that's
two
okay.
times ago.
That's okay, because you know this is a pivotal battle.
To me, if you were going to pick one battle out of the war, this is it.
I
mean, just if you're going to go top battles of the war, Stalingrad beats all the others hands down, because it's a war. It's a battle that the Germans never recover from.
Well, I mean, think about how many troops the Germans send to try and, well, effectively starve out the Soviets in Stalingrad.
Well, I mean, they try to beat them out. Even worse than, like Leningrad's still under siege up there in the north. They're trying to starve them out, and they're eating each other and rats and everything else.
No thanks.
This is, you can't really call it a siege of Stalingrad, because it's not like they're sitting outside the city waiting for them to surrender.
No.
They're in the middle of the city being bloodily, their nose is getting bloody, because the German army is designed to be a rapier.
And as again, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, the fact that, again, the idea of the Germans getting into the urban conflict, this is a terrible time for them. They're not used to going building to building, flushing out the Soviets.
Right. Well, I mean, this shows the Soviet counterattack, but when we see the Germans come this way, they fight the same way. They go outside the cities, they encircle, they crush with their infantry, they move forward, and they move forward. But then for whatever reason, Hitler gets
a wild hair up his
brain fart and decides he's going to reduce Stalingrad, probably because of the name. I mean,
I get it.
Although I don't know why he didn't do that for Stalino. But anyway.
Yeah. But but again, here's the interesting thing about Stalingrad. What did it have?
Industry.
But
not even a huge amount of it.
I was gonna say, so did Kiev.
My personal thought. I know they're short of oil. Not like the Japanese.
No. But I would have at least come down here into the Caucasus
I mean,
Mountains.
this black dotted line is the farthest reach that they take, which means they've taken most of the oil fields.
Right.
Because they're not up in the mountains; they're down here. But the thing is the German army is designed to do this sweep around the flanks, just like we talked about with El Alamein.
Right.
They're designed to go around the enemy, punch a hole, surround, crush.
Right.
When of course, they can't fight back as well because they have no supplies. They're surrounded on every side.
Sure.
Putting them in Stalingrad, where you literally take an armored division and you feed it into street to street, building to building fighting. You're taking a rapier.
Yeah.
The nice thin bouncy sword that touche, and you're using it like a battle axe.
It doesn't work. That doesn't work at all.
You're just banging on this thing that doesn't want to break.
Of course not.
And the Russians just keep feeding troops in there. I think at a certain point, I don't know when Zhukov came up with Operation Uranus, which is just a really fancy Greek way of saying Uranus. But it's really good if you're teaching kids. Say Uranus, they don't know what the heck you're saying.
Exactly.
Nobody giggles. I don't know when he came up with this plan, but we know by January it was in place.
Okay.
They're just feeding guys across the Volga River to keep the Germans occupied, keep them focused on taking the city. Because they're building up their forces on the north and the south sides of Stalingrad, and they're going to come across the river when it freezes.
Sure.
Because it's going to freeze.
Of course.
It's weird because we think about, it's the southern part of the country. Well, this southern part of the country is like Minneapolis and north.
Yes,
for us.
Exactly.
It's cold.
Yeah, it gets very cold in this area.
And, when you look at Stalingrad, it would have made more sense if the Germans would have just went like that.
And just literally collapsed on them.
Well, they just surrounded it like they did everything else.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They went in. And this battle, the German 6th Army, run by a guy, General von Paulus, who, I don't know that he's a bad general. He's doing what he's told. But this is not what he's trained for.
No.
The German army after World War I is absolutely terrified of this kind of fighting because that's what World War I looked like. These bloody battles where you gain, 100 yards for 1,000 men.
And it doesn't do any.
They know what the world looks like back home.
Yeah.
They don't have an extra 100,000 guys to throw away in this city.
Not even close.
But Hitler is absolutely determined to take this city. And, it goes well in the first stages, but then it just bogs down because how do you stop? It's like stomping on cockroaches.
Yeah. They're just coming out everywhere.
Look, we got that platoon of Russians out of that apartment building. Then there's another platoon of Russians over there in the other apartment building.
Right.
Or they're back behind you now because they went through the sewers.
Right.
And they're in an apartment store shooting at you.
Exactly. The
German army's trained to fight with that fire and mover, very much like the American army today. You pin them down with fire, and you send somebody around and you pincer them.
Right.
But the problem is when you try to pincer, when you're fighting in a combined area of 3 blocks with a battalion, and you try to go that 4th block, well, now there's some more Russians shooting at you.
Right.
The battle just keeps getting bigger.
Right.
And you start losing guys, and suddenly that pincer move isn't a pincer move, it's just oh gosh, we've occupied another building.
Yay.
Great. And we've lost more guys. Enemy at the Gates, great movie.
Oh, yes.
Really shows this kind of fighting very well, I think. Just the absolute devastation and the bloodiness of it. When you're fighting and your enemy is 300-400 yards away, you can fire your rifle all day and not hit anything.
Mm-hmm.
When you're fighting when your enemy's 30 feet away, you're hitting things.
Yes.
Or they're hitting you, or both.
Something.
So it just grinds up your forces.
Well, and it is literally the Germans going into a meat grinder.
Oh yeah, it's like taking your sausage and shoving it in a meat grinder. It's just there's blood everywhere, and you're not really accomplishing anything because the meat grinder's still working.
Right. And so this again, as we mentioned before, being that pivotal battle of World War II, it forces the Germans to retreat.
Well, they wish.
Yeah.
Because when Khrushchev was actually at the Battle of Stalingrad as well, he was a political officer for the defense of Stalingrad. Later becomes premier.
Yes. Molotov?
Zhukov. Oh, I don't know. I'm blanking. When he launches his Uranos and it breaks through these Italian and Romanian troops on the flanks, and it quickly seals the 6th Army inside Stalingrad. Well, this means all these guys down here have to run.
Yes.
For their lives. Because if the Russians keep going west, they'll get trapped down here. So all this work, Army Group A does, and Army Group Don, and there's another group that tried to go up and try to save that little black line here. Was one little attempt to rescue Stalingrad. It's just there's too many Russians. I mean, they do what the Germans do, same pincer idea, but just it's like a bear hug.
Oh, yeah.
To make it Russian.
Very nice.
And by, what is it, February?
Yeah. February.
They're out of supplies.
3.
Hitler promotes von Paulus to a field marshal because no German field marshal has ever surrendered. And like the next day he surrenders. Because he's not an idiot.
Yeah.
His men are starving.
Yeah.
They're freezing to death.
Of course.
They have no ammunition. They have no gas. The Germans are trying to drop air supply.
Not going to happen.
I'm not sure we could do that today with C-130s and C-141s. With the planes they have, it's just, you'd have to fly 27 flights with one plane to probably keep the company fed.
Yeah, right.
It's just, everything weighs a lot. Ammunition weighs a lot.
It does.
And fuel oil weighs a lot. And, clothing and food. All these things have to go by air. And the German Air Force at this point, it's just started to be, we can start to see the whittling. The constant fighting ever since the Battle of Britain and on. The Air Force has been in the action. We see it, in Africa, we see it here. They've been busy. It's whittling down their strength.
Yeah.
Just slowly but surely, they're running out of planes and guys to fly them.
Yeah.
And again, it's the guys to fly them that is the biggest shortage that we see, just like we'll see in the Pacific.
Of course.
It's just, you don't have time to train anybody because you're getting constantly, you got to throw them into the fight. You just don't have time.
Yeah, you can't.
I can't wait another 3 weeks for them to get another 80 hours of flight time. They've got to go now.
Yeah.
When they barely know how to land.
Or we're done.
Yeah, or we lose a battle,
Yeah.
and we, for one of a nail kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yep.
But eventually, that kind of short-sightedness leads to defeat.
Of course.
Um,
And again, like,
But it's over 600,000 guys that get captured.
jeez,
Only about 8,000 of them ever come home, by the way.
wow.
The Soviets are just as friendly to their Germans as the Germans are to the Russians.
Of course they are. So
Yeah, and this is, when we talk about barbarity, we'll talk about it in the Pacific War, because it gets pretty brutal.
yeah,
But compared to the Germans and the Russians fighting, we were playing tiddlywinks. We really were. They are just, they slaughter each other with great abandon.
and that was kind of Hitler's philosophy.
Well, they're Untermenschen.
Right.
They're subhuman.
Right.
And so rape and murder become pretty much a standard on the German army on the drive east.
And so the Russians
Soviets
do it just
on the drive west.
Mhm.
And it gets, once they cross into German territory, the
Oh,
gloves
it's all
come
hell
off.
breaks loose.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's nightmarish to read the stories. But anyway, this battle here, there's another one coming next year, 43, that's
Mhm.
important.
Right.
But it's hard to see how the Battle of Kursk could have changed the direction of the war.
This one is definitely that
This
tipping
is
point.
the 600,000 guys out of an army of like 8 to 9 million. Doesn't seem like a lot, but they're all combat troops.
Right.
These are your guys. These are your gravel agitators.
These are the people
But these
who've
are the
been
do the fighting. They're
Mhm.
not guys who are going to sit behind a desk and fill out forms.
Well, and these guys have been fighting for 2-3 years. They
Well,
were the
they
ones.
came in June of 41. Now it's
Right.
December of 42. So 18 months.
I mean, think about that. This is your group, and unfortunately,
It's gone.
they're no more.
Right. It's the whole army has to surrender, and it's hard to imagine the number of casualties and the bloodiness of the fighting, because as Americans, the only thing that comes close is things like Gettysburg and Antietam,
Sure.
and that's way in the past. So
Right.
we can't imagine the artillery and the automatic weapons and grenades and things
yeah.
that these people are using.
Right. I mean, it is a bloodbath.
It is a bloodbath on both sides, but the Soviets again don't really seem to care.
Well, they just throw anyone and everyone they can in front of these bullets.
Right, well, that enemy at the gates,
Yes.
that one of those opening scenes where they
Right.
basically take, one guy gets a 5 bock of ammunition, the other guy gets the gun.
And if you don't have the gun, you pick it up if the guy who's
Right.
got the gun dies.
Yes.
So
So you're ready, but you're literally just charging straight into machine gun fire
with nothing,
with no protection, no body armor,
nothing.
nothing like that, and not a whole lot of medical help if you get hit.
No, especially your Soviet Russia.
Especially the Soviet side. The Germans had a whole lot better hospital system.
Sure, Soviets are like, oh, you got shot in the leg.
But I mean, this battle, according to the Germans, couldn't happen. The losses that the Soviets had suffered in 1941 were so heavy. The number of divisions that the German intelligence said had been destroyed was so far above the number of divisions they had that they were like, these can't be effective fighting forces. And then they do it again in the summer. So look at it, we've destroyed the Soviet army twice, and they couldn't possibly attack us on the flanks like that.
Do you think there was numbers being skewed by either side, or?
I think in a lot of ways the Germans didn't really realize the number of Soviets who just ran away
Okay.
and eventually got back to their own lines
Sure.
and were recycled right back into the
Right.
fight.
Right.
I think that their understanding of the casualty rates was probably, I think their understanding that this Russian division had 12,000 men in it probably wasn't true. They might only had 6 or 7.
Okay.
So those
I
other
see.
thousands of guys weren't there and dead.
Got it.
I think, I don't think it was a matter of like hubris or anything like that. I think it was just a matter of they were failing to realize the enemy that they were fighting wasn't as efficient and as organized as they were.
Well, and that's for sure. They definitely misjudged their enemy.
And then of course, focusing on Stalingrad so much for so long.
Right.
I mean, even if you understood that, oh, okay, we got drawn into this battle in a city, maybe we should just pull out and isolate it. That, if that would have been done, they could have gone over here to Astrakhan, cut off the entire Caucasus, and then set up their own defensive line. And then in 43, they would have been looking pushing north.
But
behind
unfortunately,
this line of the Volga.
that doesn't happen.
No, because Hitler gets focused on, and I think part of it goes back to that. How are we counting their divisions and their casualties?
Sure.
If we can break them here, they've got to be on their last guy.
Then
I'm sure Hitler's picturing like this last truck pulls up that holds 20 guys and only has like 8.
Yeah.
He's like, once that truck's empty, we win.
Right.
And it was
Well,
just like
that's
in World War I, though.
right.
Both sides had that same delusion that if we can just bleed them a little bit more,
Yeah.
we'll
no,
win.
Thank you.
I mean, that was World War I almost to a T.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it's a weird battle in the middle of this blitzkrieg, all these maneuvers, all these tanks that are designed to go fast across
Yeah,
country.
and then you just kind of get
grind them
bogged
into a
down.
city. Yeah, you grind them into a city. Well, you notice that Leningrad, it got surrounded within, I want to say 2 months of the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
It's still there. It never surrenders.
Right.
Because
You're
the
looking-
Germans don't really have the desire
Yeah.
or the equipment to go
Right.
street to street
And
reduce Leningrad to nothing.
Right.
They just try to starve it out. And they do a fairly decent job, except that the lake there freezes over for like 6 months of the year.
Yeah, you're
and
way
you just drive
far
trucks
north.
over it all the time.
Exactly.
I'm like, I think I would have been just dropping artillery on that like non-stop.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure.
But-
But hey, that's not
But
ours.
here at the beginning of 43, the Axis, well, all 3 of the Axis, if we count El Alamein,
Yeah.
for the Italians,
Yeah.
they have been body checked. Not
Oh,
just
for
checked
sure.
and slowed
No, no,
down, but
no,
they have
they are.
literally been body checked
They are, yes.
in a way that we're not going to see much recovery. The Germans are the only ones that really show a lot of resilience, I guess, in the sense that they keep fighting a lot longer than you would think.
Right.
I mean, the Japanese fight to the death, but
The
we're just literally hopping from island to
correct.
island.
And then the Italians are just, oh, I got a boo boo.
Well, they're out of the war in what, 6 months?
Yep.
Like
That's
June,
exactly
July
right.
of 43?
Well, yeah, exactly. So they're done. They're done. Literally, they got their boo boo and they run home to mommy.
Well, I mean, we have to remember, of course, Mussolini's been in power for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And his image
Mm-hmm.
of the great master plan guy, which had been working really well all the way up to the invasion of Albania.
Until
After that, it just started falling apart.
Right.
Greece was a nightmare. I mean, invading France was okay, but then the
Yeah.
fighting in England was back and forth, or in Africa was
yeah,
back and forth.
back and forth, and then
It-
you lose too many troops. You lose the will of your soldiers to fight.
And you got to remember, Italy is, if you want to look at European powers, probably a 3rd tier power.
Oh, for sure.
The population's way too small. The
Yeah.
economy's much smaller than
Yeah.
Germany or France or England. And they just don't have the resources to suffer losses like they do because they can't get these guys back from Africa.
Right.
So, whereas we looked at the middle of 42 as the darkest hour, the sun's shining pretty bright at the beginning of 1943 for the Allies.
I would agree. So anyway, hey, you guys make sure that you like, subscribe, share, give us any comments you have. Be sure to come back next time where we will focus the next year.
Yeah.
And
Maybe we'll clean up some stuff in 42, but there's not
Yeah,
much.
not much.
We covered most of it.
yeah. All right, take care.
Thank you.